This is Law of Attraction Explored. I'm Tim Grimes. Some of you are probably wondering about my coaching, so I thought I would just take a minute to explain what it is that I offer. What I do with people is get real deep. And what do I mean by we get deep? Well, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know exactly what I mean when I say that. The kind of coaching that I offer is meant to transform your life. And I feel very confident that it will transform your life and that you'll enjoy doing it. And if you don't, to be frank, you don't have to pay me. I like working with people who want to go deep, people who are willing to explore what's going on the inside and realize that there's nothing wrong with them and that what is going on the inside is actually good. And dare we say it, what's going on the inside is actually God. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can always email me at info@radicalcounselor.com, or you can just go to my website, radicalcounselor.com. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. So I just wanted to mention that last episode, we were going over some of the main themes that we so often discuss. And so much of this material that we're talking about is simply about coming back to the moment and having some kind of recognition of the power of the moment, the inherent abundance of the moment. And this is very hard to describe in words. It's mystical in a way. And I said last episode that's mostly what this show is about. But, this is important, and that's why I want to talk about it today. And I think most of you already know this who have been listening to this show, but it's always important to clarify this. There's also an aspect of what we're talking about and of this show and of the law of attraction in general, for sure, with the law of attraction in general, that is just totally practical and pragmatic. And so while the approach that I like to share with you guys generally tends to be kind of mystical and more non-dual centered, I would say, than, most law of attraction advice you hear, and much more about just kind of sinking into the abundance of the moment and recognizing that everything is okay from that point. While that is the approach that we're generally talking about, we also are talking sometimes about very practical applications of it, and even more interestingly, just very, very, very practical law of attraction advice. And I'm specifically thinking of Émile Coué when I say this. What's interesting is that we get really far out with this show, but at the same time, I'm always telling you that Coué is my favorite law of attraction teacher. And Coué is one of the most, mundane, non-spiritual sounding of all law of attraction teachers. And as I've said, the best. So there's this highly practical element that Coué spells out better than anybody that I also feel very invested in sharing, in this podcast with everybody. And of course, Coué not only is very practical, he's also super profound, and we can make those connections between the profound nowness of the moment, the profound abundance of our imagination in the moment, and with what Coué is saying. It's just Coué usually is not using such, esoteric language like Neville might be using, or someone like H. Emily Cady might be using, where they're using these kind of spiritual terms that are very far out there and connect you with God and kind of make you feel this empowered otherworldliness, Coué is much more mundane. And he's saying your imagination is simply going to help you heal your body if you allow it. And it's also going to allow you to heal a lot of the neurotic tendencies that you might have, whether that, involves relationships or whether that involves your financial situation or whatever problems you have. If you apply the advice that Coué is talking about, if you genuinely apply it, it is going to help improve that situation that you find yourself in that you want to improve. Your life is going to get better and better. And, it's an interesting dichotomy where I love just talking about the kind of mystical, we're in the moment, there's only this moment, this is it. Very, very hard to describe. But then I also love to share this, let's practically improve ourselves with just working on our imagination angle that Coué always talks about. And so today I thought I would read a quote from Coué that I actually put at the beginning of The Law of Attraction Simplified, because it, like most of Coué's stuff cuts right to the point, cuts right to the center of the practical application of these principles. So here it is. You can find this quote in Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion. Coué said, "It is impossible to think of two things at the same time. That is to say, two ideas may be in juxtaposition, but they cannot be superimposed in our mind. Every thought that completely fills our mind becomes true for us and has a tendency to transform itself into action. Therefore, if you can cause a sick person to think that his or her trouble is getting better, it will disappear. If you are able to make a kleptomaniac think that he will not steal anymore, he will stop stealing. He is cured." I mean, Coué is just so good. This quote is a great illustration of highly practical advice using non-spiritual language and at the same time talking about really far out stuff. He says it's impossible to think of two things at the same time. In other words, you can only have one thought at a time. Two ideas may be in juxtaposition. They might be one after the other, and they might be very different from each other, but they can't be superimposed in our mind at the same time. And when we have a series of thoughts that fills our mind one after another that are, all along the same theme, it's very likely we're going to buy into them. It has a tendency to transform itself into action, into manifestation. If you can cause a sick person to think that his or her trouble is getting better, they will get better. See, when I talk about not thinking and being in the moment, I'm really talking about, as I discuss at length in The Joy of Not Thinking, I'm talking about not overthinking and recognizing that the moment is good. And when we feel good, our thoughts feel very clean, one could say, where you're not worried and you feel at peace in the present moment. In other words, you think better, you think you are better, you think things are fine, and therefore things get better and things are fine. This all can happen like that. Stop your overthinking, recognize what you actually are in this moment. Recognize that what you are is good and that you can always access it in this way. If you think that's true, and it is true when you recognize it in the moment, you can then build upon it and your life can become better and better. By becoming more present and recognizing what you are inherently, your life becomes better. And the more you recognize it consciously in this way and think it is happening, the more it happens. This is a direct illustration of what Coué is talking about on a practical level and what we like to discuss on more of a mystical, ineffable level. This is the combination right here. And honestly, the way I'm explaining it right now, I don't know if I'm explaining it that well. I don't know how many people are going to grasp what I'm getting at, but I think you will. I guess what I'm also saying is that even though Coué is giving us the most concise and basic of psychological explanations for why the law of attraction works, he's also just so freaking deep at the same time. If you can cause a sick person to think that his or her trouble is getting better, it will disappear. If you are able to make a kleptomaniac think that he will not steal anymore, he will stop stealing. Whatever someone thinks, whatever someone believes, shapes their life. See, you don't have to use any real far-out spiritual language. And again, even though I like to do that, and a lot of the law of attraction teachers that we like to talk about, like Neville and H. Emily Cady and Joseph Murphy, they like to use pretty, spiritual sounding, religious sounding language. You don't have to do that. One thing that the law of attraction does not convey well is that there is this inherent goodness that's just here. Last episode, I think that Neville quote did try to convey that and did convey that pretty well. But in my opinion, usually how that's articulated in the law of attraction is kind of wishy-washy. It's articulated much better, in more mystical, non-dual Zen teachings. To give you an example, Byron Katie, Jan Fraser, Nisargadatta Maharaj. Those are some modern teachers who articulate the perfection, the godliness of the moment much better than most law of attraction teachers. An issue, in my opinion, is that in the law of attraction, a lot of those teachers try to articulate that as well as the practical points and these kind of helpful psychological points, and they don't do it that well. They don't do it as well as someone like Neville does. They fail. And I think one reason that Coué is superior to pretty much anybody is because he doesn't even try to do it. He says this has nothing necessarily to do with deep, mystical, spiritual truth. This is just how we think. It's impossible to think of two things at the same time. And if you are able to think that something is improving, it's going to improve. If you truly think it is going to improve. The problem is we think something is going to improve, and then we have the next thought says it's not going to improve. And the next thought says it's not going to improve. And we don't think it's going to improve for long enough for something to actually improve. But if you are able to create a chain of thoughts to such a degree where it sustains the positive thought, then that positive thought is going to manifest. Every thought that completely fills our mind becomes true for us and has a tendency to transform itself into action. So, the mix between practical law of attraction and deep spiritual law of attraction or spiritual truth is a hard gap to even talk about. And in this show, we're really navigating both points. And I hope that you're getting something out of us doing that. Enjoy.